right, good morning. This is Sports for Real with Coach Hall. Got a little time for a quick sound bite on what's going on in pro sports. Last night, the Edmonton Oilers took Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals. They were down 3-2, and they came back with two third period goals to steal that game. Even though they have home ice, the Panthers are the champions from last year. As you know, they went Game 7, and Florida won the first three and almost choked it all away to come back and finish it in Game 7. Then they come back and lose the first game this year. So, you know, Edmonton had that sour taste in their mouth for a whole year waiting for a chance to exact revenge on anybody who got in their way. And it just so happens to be the team that knocked them off last year, and they take the first game. Pretty exciting hockey matches. A lot of big hits that take place, and it almost puts you in the mind of what football used to be when you see some of those hard shots up against the glass. It's exhilarating. But I don't want to talk too much about that. As you know, 2 days ago, Tom Thibodeau, after much speculation, got the axe. He suffered the consequences of the Knicks' failures. The Knicks, the players, you know, especially a guy like Brunson, they went against the coach, and the team fired the coach as a response. Now, some of those guys might have a legitimate argument. I mean, if you're a guy like Brunson and you're out there on the court all the time, maybe you might want a break. But at the same time, if you're a true pro player and you value what you're doing, you want to be the guy on the floor when it counts the most. Now, maybe he left him out there a few minutes too long, but you knew what you're going to be dealing with all along, so you have to take responsibility of getting in better shape. Now, regardless who was on the floor or how long you were on the floor, you still have to execute when you're there. A lot of times those guys, they made a lot of bad passes. They missed a lot of shots. They didn't get back on defense. They didn't do this. They didn't do that. A whole bunch of blame could have gone to the players. And it's not fair for a coach to suffer the blame for the failures when the players get all the credit for when they do something good. It doesn't add up. And I don't think that Thibodeau should have been fired. I don't think he should have been fired in Chicago. And I think he could have stayed a little bit longer in Minnesota. So he's a scapegoat a lot of times. You always get the axe when, I put it this way, he don't get the benefit of the doubt when people are trying to consider if they want to fire him or not. JC, how you doing, man? Lord Bloxify, I guess it says H. Hello. You don't get the benefit of the doubt, and that's 3 times now he's been fired. And I think that the Knicks, they're not that far away. Get a player or two here or there. Maybe you can cut back on some of the guys' minutes, and they could have gone a little bit farther than what they did. But if anything, I think if he was going to get fired, he's probably going to be pointing back to game number 1 when they had that big lead with 2 minutes left and they blew it. And that set the stage for what took place in the whole series. Had they won that game, we wouldn't be talking about this now. We'd be talking about the Knicks in the finals instead of the Pacers. But before you cry for Thibodeau, last year he signed a 3-year extension worth X amount of dollars. So he didn't walk out the door empty-handed. He walked out the door with $30 million. Like I said before, if I'm going to be a coach and you want to fire me and you got to pay me $30 million, fire me. I'll get another job, and I hope you fire me again. So this guy is going to be paid $30 million just to stay at home next year. Now, I don't know how the NBA works in relation to football. You know, if a football coach gets fired and he still has money left on his deal, he goes and take another job, then the other team picks that up. I don't know if the NBA does that or not. But if they did, and I don't know why guys like, college football coaches, I remember Charlie Strong, he got fired, and he went and got another job, and a couple of other guys got fired and went to get other jobs. I would sit out, and you're going to have to pay me all my money before I went and got me another job. But I guess they want to prove a point that they're better coaches than what they are, and they go jump back into the mix, traumatized in a sense, But that's what they do. But me, I'm sitting out. I'm gonna get all my money. Then I'm gonna go find me another job. So again, don't cry for Thibodeau because he's walking away pretty fat, and he's not dumb like Derek Carr. As you know, Derek Carr retired, and he just had some shoulder surgery. I forget what it was that kept him out. He wasn't going to be able to play this year, and he opted to have surgery. And because he opted, he cut a deal with the team that he'll be allowed to keep that roster bonus he got in March, but give away the $30 million he would have got had he stayed with the team. Well, if he had got the surgery, he would have been able to be eligible for that $30 million. So essentially, by retiring and not having that surgery, he walks away from $30 million. And Thibodeau is not going to do that. But tonight, the Knicks, why waste time on people who are no longer existing this year? The big news tonight in the NBA is really Game 1 of the NBA Finals. We've been sitting around for almost a week from the last game that was played on Saturday when the Knicks got knocked off in 6 by Indiana. OKC, they've been sitting around since Thursday, so they've been a week off. So you might have a little rust there with OKC, just a little bit less from the Pacers. But as of now, most people aren't giving the Pacers much of a chance to compete with OKC. And normally I'm an underdog guy, but I have to be a realist. And I don't think that Indiana, they're not in a good position for this particular series. Not because they don't have the talent, but I think the same things that got some of the other teams beat is going to bite Indiana. They can't afford to fall down in big leads, with big leads and expect to come back in the last couple of minutes. That's not going to happen with OKC. They can't afford to be inconsistent. If you look at the way Indiana plays, Halliburton might be on tonight, but he won't do nothing the next 2 games. Siakam might give you 30 tonight, and he won't do anything till game 3. Miles Turner, same way. Nimhard, I call him Nimrod because he's been playing like a Nimrod lately, at least in that series. Last couple of games, he couldn't do nothing right. So he's very inconsistent. So is Neesmith. I call him Bumbledy Boo. He'll stumble and fumble and make silly mistakes, and then all of a sudden he'll get hot and hit a couple threes, and then he'll go back being Bumbledy Boo again. So when you're inconsistent like that, I don't see how you're going to beat a well-oiled team and call yourself a champion. The sad thing about these playoffs, and I don't care what level it is, what sport it is, in my opinion, most championships are decided in the brackets. The championship game itself is normally a showcase for the champion. In other words, a blowout. But if you look back through the brackets, they match somewhere in the bracket. And I think OKC's match is Denver. Once they got by Denver, everybody's talking about Minnesota. Minnesota was hit and miss. They were fine as long as they out hitting threes and running the floor in transition. Yeah, they look like a championship team. But when they can't do that, then they just look like a run-of-the-mill team. And you saw how they went out in 5. Well, to me, Indiana looks a whole lot like Minnesota. If the other team is not making mistakes and allowing this team to hang around and matching the Pacers' inconsistency for long periods of time to allow them to hang around to steal some of these games, then they have a chance. Just like Minnesota. If Minnesota is able to hit threes and they're consistent with it, then they have a chance. But you have to be consistent at any level on any sport if you want to be a champion. And I don't see that from Indiana at this point. Maybe in the future. But now, the only chance I give Indiana is if they come out and they are on every single night. Now, the pundits are saying that Indiana, they need to run the floor and try to score 130 points a game. Well, OKC can do the same thing. But I don't think you want to get into a track meet with these guys because these guys here are better shooters than the Pacers. And you give Nimhard, again, I call him Nimrod. You give Nimrod a great credit for slowing down Brunson, but Brunson is in direct relation to his size. They're about the same size. Brunson's not that tall, what, 6'2" maybe? Well, Gilgeous is 6'7". So even if he played tough defense on him, if he tried to grab him and throw him to the floor like Edwards and all those guys tried to do, he still can get his shot off because he's just going to raise up over you and shoot right on your head. And if he's on and being consistent like he's been, then I don't see what Indiana can do to counter that. And it just looked like to me a tough uphill battle. And just like any other team that upsets their way to the championship, you're either going to do one or two things when you get to the championship level. You're either going to continue to upset, or midnight's going to strike and you're going to be looking like TCU did a couple years ago against Georgia. You're going to realize you're in the championship game. Now the whole world is watching, and you're not playing the way that got you to that level. And all you can do is learn a lesson. And it's worse in basketball because, at least in football, you only have to die for 60 minutes. Basketball, you got 4 games. And I think I'd rather go ahead and get killed with one football game as opposed to being ran off the floor 4 straight times. That's worse to me. JC, I think OKC will win championship in 5. Well, I'm thinking this, JC. I agree with that, except for one thing. If OKC comes out and blows them out 2 games, then we might be looking at a sweep. Now, that's not to say or any disrespect to Indiana because they may come out and steal one. But like I said before, the only way Indiana can compete, they're going to have to be consistent every time they step on the floor. And they hadn't shown me that. Now, they are also saying that Indiana has been the best offensive team throughout the playoffs. Well, you hadn't played OKC. And OKC has been the best team throughout the year, not just throughout the playoffs. And Indiana's going to have to show me that they can compete with this team. Now, they're a professional team, and you would think because they made it to the finals, they should match up. But like I said, championships are just a showcase for the champion. The teams that they've beaten to that point usually give true champions their best test. And I don't think that Indiana is a better matchup than what Denver was for them. And once they got past that Denver matchup, and you see what happened when they really had to win it in Game 7, they ran them off. And I got things to say about that too, but basketball, it comes with a stench anyway. So I wonder if the whole thing is fixed. But from what I see, I think that Indiana's got a problem. But the question today is, until the game comes along, did Thibodeau deserve to be fired? Most of you are saying he did deserve to be fired. And I think the criticism with him is he let his players stay out on the court too long. Now, I give you apples to bowling ball comparison, and it's somewhat in defense of him. I had a girls basketball team, high school, and I didn't have very much depth. So I played most of my starters all the time because I knew once I get into the bench, it's a drop off from what I had. I had found a lineup that worked that I can compete with, but once I went to the bench or somebody got into foul trouble, that changed the whole complexity of the team. And it don't take long for those inferior players to be found. If their coach don't see it right away, the players will pick it up immediately. She can't keep up with me. I can do this. She can't stop that. And next thing you know, a close game could turn into, now you're down by 15 points, only because you don't have the depth. Well, I didn't have anywhere to go. But Thibodeau, he did have a bench full of NBA players. I think if a guy is worthy enough to be in the league, he should be able to compete in any situation. But obviously that is not the case. And it is not the case on most sports. In most sports, it's not the case. So it goes back to what Bill Russell was saying about the conversation he had with Michael Jordan. Because you have so many teams in the league, a lot of guys are in the league because there's so many teams. But if the league was condensed, then you will have better teams because you will have less thinning of your rosters. The rosters have to be filled with somebody, right? Well, the guys that would have been cut years ago because you didn't have that many teams, they can make the roster now. And just because they're on the roster doesn't mean that they can play. And subconsciously, I think Thibodeau, he knew that. That's why he went with what he thought worked best. And it come back to haunt him 3 times. You blame him for the injuries Rose got. You blame him for running down these guys in New York. And you fire him every time. But that's just the way it goes. But as a coach, I do know this. You better come up with a lineup that you can compete in. If you can't compete, then it doesn't matter what you know if you don't match up. And like I said, as a coach, you have to find a way to compete and match up the best way you can. And if that means leaving your starters out longer, then that's what you have to do. But the only drawback I say to that is for him, he's got a roster full of NBA players. And evidently, they're not really NBA caliber players if you can't trust them to come in the game for a few minutes to maintain while your starters sit on the bench. So that's not necessarily on him. That's also on the GM. If you can't get the man the right players, yeah, you can actually sabotage the guy. And I understand that, some of the moves the GM made was actually moves to sabotage the coach. They gave up like 5 first-round picks to get Bridges from the Nets. What sense does that make? If he ain't Michael Jordan or Wilt Chamberlain or somebody, I'm not giving up 5 first-round picks. So if he's deserved to be fired, then what about some of the other people in that front office? All right, JC says, they say that ex-Denver coach Malone would be the new Knicks coach. Well, that's some of the thoughts out there. It wouldn't make sense to bring in a guy that's just won a championship just 2 seasons ago. But the problem with him, what goes on behind the scenes? Evidently, he lost the locker room some kind of way. And they point to the fact that Denver made a nice little run after he was no longer the coach. Now, I think Denver was in position to make a nice run anyway. It wasn't like they were getting beat by 30, 40 points. They weren't losing by very many points. So Denver was definitely a threat in the West. It was really a coin toss outside of OKC as to who was going to make that championship round. And it just so happened that Denver, they had to play OKC in the semis. But Golden State, if they don't lose Curry, they could have been there. Just a lot of things could have happened in the Western Conference. And I think that Malone, what's going on in the locker room played a big part in him being fired. A lot of things behind the scenes. So if he goes to New York, it'll be a similar type thing. Yeah, he may win right away, but if he doesn't get farther than what Thibodeau did, then what was the point of firing Thibodeau? I mean, he didn't serve any purpose to that. But if you think about Urban Meyer, when he was in college, they say he let the players pretty much do what they want to do, and the locker room was all fractured there also, but they won games on the field. And as long as they won on the field, nobody cared too much about what went on outside the locker room. But it would be questions that need to be answered from Malone as to why or how he would prevent what happened in Denver from happening in New York. But I don't think it matters anymore because these coaches, if you don't win a championship, you can get fired. Hell, you can win the championship last year, lose it this year, still get fired. The only insanity that I see that matches this is what they have up there in Valdosta, Georgia with the football team. You can lose 1 game or win the state championship this year and come back and lose 1 next year. Depending on who that loss was to, you might get fired for that. So let's do the math. You go 15-0, then you come back and go 14-1 and lose the state championship, and they want to fire you up there. You tell me what sense that makes. But that's akin to what's going on in the NBA. If a guy's capable of winning a championship, it seems to me if he got the right pieces, he can do it again. But these guys all think that they are the best, and if they don't win it, then they're just going to fire the coach. And the players, of course, they got no responsibility. They don't give a damn if the coach get fired or not. They're going to do what they do, They're not going to try to get better. They're not going to try to get themselves in better shape. They're not going to do any of that. Whatever they can't do, it's the coach's fault. Blame him. But that's just the way these new age people, new age kids are. All right. So anyway, I got to get up out of here. I may be able to come back on this afternoon and get a chance to come on yesterday at all. So I got to get back out here, see what I can do. But the question is, did Thibodeau deserve to get fired? And the few votes I have, most people, everybody is saying that he should get fired. I don't know if I agree with that or not. Matter of fact, I think he should have had a chance to come back. But when I look at the fact that it's the players who threw him under the bus, especially a guy like Brunson, who Thibodeau championed, he didn't back him. And once you find out that, you know, what you thought you had is not as solid as what it should be, then maybe it's time for Thibodeau to move on. But when things like this happen, I leave you with this. This is why coaches move on to different jobs. They control when they come and go, not stay around long enough to be fired, because any job, you're just there until they fire you or you pack up and move. And in Thibodeau's case, he walking away with $30 million, so he's straight either way. But anyway, come back on later on today, and we'll talk about the NBA Finals a little bit more. The Pacers stand up at that mountain called OKC, and a lot of people still don't want to give OKC credit. They say they're too young. They don't really know what's going on, and it's setting the stage for the fact that they could just show up and not produce. I don't think that's the case. They've been saying it all playoffs, and they still want to say it. And I think even if OKC wins the championship, they're still going to not give them full credit. But that's just the way some people are. But anyway, until then, you guys have a great day. Hope you like and subscribe. And we'll talk NBA Finals later on this afternoon. Until then, this has been Sports for Real, and I catch you on the other side. I'm out. Yeah, if I was Thibodeau,